Hello everybody, it's Katrina from the Alluring Bead Boutique, and welcome back. Today I'm going to show you guys how to do an increase and a decrease when working in square stitch. Let me get my angle set up here the way I want it. So what I've done here is I've went ahead and stitched a couple of rows of square stitch using some 8/0 delicas just out of my stash, nothing special. And I've got 10 beads on each row so far. Now, if you can refer back to my original square stitch tutorial if you're unsure of how to do square stitch, or you can head over to the alluringboutique.com, and if you prefer to have like step-by-step pictures and written instructions, I do have a square stitch guide there. But today I'm going to show you how to do an increase and a decrease when you're working with this stitch. So I'm going to go ahead and show you the increase first. So I've added my second row, and I'm in position to, if under normal circumstances, I would have turned around and begun stitching my third row here. But what I'm going to do is do an increase. So I'm going to go ahead and pick up 2 beads, and I'm going to let those drop all the way down till they sit right on top of the beadwork. Just like that. My thread is exiting from the top of the second bead. I'm going to take my needle and I'm going to come back through that first bead I picked up from the bottom to the top and pull my thread all the way through. And I'm going to position the beads so that the second bead falls in line and sits right next to the first bead on the left, because I'm sewing I'm sewing towards the left because I'm left-handed. So now my thread is exiting the top of that second bead. I need to get into position by just coming from the top to the bottom through that second bead. And here we have increased our previous row by 1 bead, and we've got the first bead added of our new third row. So now we're just going to do square stitch to the other end. So I'm going to flip it over. It's just a little bit easier for me to work in the opposite direction when I sew using square stitch. So now I need to put a bead right beside this topaz bead, so I'm picking up one. My thread is exiting the top of that first bead of my new row. I'm going to take my needle and I'm going to come from top through the bottom of that second bead of the previous row, just regular old square stitch, pull the bead into position, and then I'm going to step up through that new bead from the bottom to the top. Without picking up anything, I'm just positioning. And when I pull my thread, I want to make sure that my working thread doesn't get hung up on this lower bead. I want it to fall into position on this seam line right here, where my needle is, right there. So now I can just add the next bead. And this is just regular square stitch. So I'm picking up a bead. I take my needle and go from top to bottom through the corresponding bead on the previous row, which is this silver bead. Pull through, position my bead, and step up. And like I said, if you are unfamiliar with square stitch, you may want to check out that video first. So I won't make you guys watch me square stitch all the way to the end of this row, unless you just really want to watch me square stitch to the end of this row. What I'm going to do is I'm just going to go ahead and repeat these steps over and over till I get to the other end. And I'm going to show you how to do the increase once again on the opposite side so that our beadwork matches up on both ends. So now I have square stitched all the way up to the end of my row. What I've done here is I went in, this was a stop bead, even though it's the same color as my silver over here. I went in and pulled it out just a little bit so you can see that now my increase is over my second row and my third row. So I'm getting ready to do another increase on the opposite end. So I'm going to start by picking up the 2 beads just like I did before, and drop them all the way down to the beadwork. I'm going to take my needle and come up through from the bottom to the top, that very first bead I just picked up. And pull it through. and position my second bead side by side. The first bead creates the increase over my previous row beadwork, which is row 3. The second bead is becomes the first bead of row 4 on an increased row, just like that. Then you would just simply flip it or work your square stitch whichever direction that you like, and you would just continue on adding your square stitch beads one by one for the remainder of your new row. And I accidentally went through 2 beads there, but to remedy that I will just step up through 2 beads here. And there I would just continue on from there till I get to the end of the opposite row. So I'm going to work my way towards this opposite end, and I'm going to show you guys how to do a decrease when I get close to the end. So I've worked my way to the other end of my beadwork, and you can see that the last bead I added is this silver bead here. So if I wanted to go back to my regular 10 bead row like I started with, I would just simply add my last bead just like I normally would in square stitch. So I use these 2 colors of beads so you can easily see which ones I'm working with. So I would add my last topaz bead, go back up through it, the first bead, or the one I'm just adding to get into position. Then I would simply flip my work over and begin my square stitch heading back in the opposite direction. So I'm coming out of that topaz bead. I would just pick up a topaz bead, sew down through the bead next to it, position it so it sits beside the previous bead, and then sew up. Step up into the new bead. And continue the row using the whichever beads and, sewing your beads one at a time like you do in square stitch. And step up before you pick up another bead. Once you got down to this end, once you've added the silver bead, you would forego adding a bead here and just simply turn around. So now I've sewn back down to the opposite end, and I've added my second to last bead. If I wanted to continue on with the increase on this side, I would simply go ahead and add this topaz bead using square stitch right here. If I want to do the decrease, I simply flip the work and sew back up the previous row, adding square stitch 1 bead at a time this way. So if you'll notice that when I did the increase on the first side, I did the increase in silver here, and it wound up causing rows 2 and 3 to have an increased bead. When I sewed to the opposite end and did the increase with my topaz beads here, it wound up putting the increase over rows 3 and 4. Now say I wanted to go back here and put an increased bead at the top of row 2. Let me show you how you would do that. So currently my thread is exiting the top of the last bead I added. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to just sew down from the top to the bottom through the silver bead right next to it. Then I'm going to sew up from bottom to the top through the silver bead next over, plus the topaz bead right above it. Now to add a bead right here over row 2, I just simply need to use ladder stitch. So let me want to flip my work around. So now my thread is exiting the bottom of that topaz bead. I'm going to pick up a topaz bead, and I'm going to sew from the bottom to the top through the beads that's already sitting there at the top of my bead, at the bottom of my beadwork. Now I'll pull that through. I'm going to position that bead so it sits right over row 2. Then I'm going to sew back down through that bead, plus the silver bead beneath it, to put a thread bridge between all the beads, and so that they're all connected. So now I have 3 beads increase here on this end of my bracelet or my beadwork, and only a 2 bead here. And I'm exiting the bottom of this silver bead right here on row 2. I'm just going to come all the way down that row without skipping any beads and work my way to the opposite end of my beadwork. Then I'm going to come up through that first increase bead here on row 2 because I want to include that in my traveling. Now I'm going to come down from the top to the bottom through the bead beside of it. And now I can add the 3rd bead on the increase row right here, just using ladder stitch. So pick up a bead. My thread is exiting the bottom of this silver bead, so I'm going to come from top to bottom through that bead, through the same bead. Position my bead so that it sits beside the next one, and come back up through the bead I just added. But now I need to connect this. That bead is connected to the bead beside of it, but it is not connected to my base right here. I'm sorry. You can see that these 2 are connected, but this bead is not connected to the base beads. So I'm going to come down through 2 beads to the right. And then I'm going to sew up through the topaz bead and that new bead right there. And that way I connect the new bead to the entire base. Like so. And that's how you would even it out. So I was just quickly wanted to come in today and show you guys how to do an increase and a decrease in square stitch. As it so happens, I wound up showing you how you can sew through to the other end and use ladder stitch to add some additional beads on one row if you ever needed to. Alright guys, so if you are unfamiliar with square stitch, you can head over to the alluringboutique.com. I do have a step-by-step tutorial and with full step pictures and written instructions available in my shop. And also, I have the full step-by-step video here on YouTube. And make sure you check out the post for square stitch. And head over and check out all the posts in Bead Weaving 101 on the alluringboutique.com blog. Alright guys, that's it for today. Thanks for watching and have a good one.